Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL NewsRadio, your legacy home of the Cougars. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. Happy to have you on board to this Monday edition of Cougar Tracks as BYU football looks to bounce back after a tough loss in West Texas, and that's where we start things off with our top story of the day.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
There wasn't much that went right for BYU against Texas Tech on Saturday in Lubbock. BYU falls to Texas Tech 29-7. The Cougars are now 8-1 overall, 5-1 in Big 12 play. The good news, BYU still controls its destiny to reaching the Big 12 championship game, which is now sponsored by Edward Jones. That was an announcement on Monday. No longer Dr. Pepper for the Big 12. It's Edward Jones now. But there's still a lot of football left to be played until BYU's getting to Arlington to play in the Financial Service Big 12 championship game. Saturday didn't look great for BYU. It just didn't. And when I watched that game, rewatched it over the weekend, I thought to myself, Texas Tech's a really good football team. And it was ridiculous to me that the AP voters could not acknowledge, hey, they deserve to jump up even more in the rankings. Texas Tech is getting undersold by the voters because the voters don't understand, hey, it's okay to tear down your poll and rebuild the thing after new data is presented in front of you. Still, these pollsters are a joke, and the college football playoff rankings are the most important rankings. We'll find that out coming up on Tuesday. BYU dropped to number 12 in the AP top 25. I think the most frustrating thing for BYU in this game was that it wasn't competitive, and BYU was outclassed in the game. That surprised me. I'll admit, on Friday when I gave my score prediction, I acknowledged it was a little bit of a vibe check, thinking BYU would show up. Everything in front of you, though, showed that Texas Tech had the advantage in that game. But part of me wondered, would Texas Tech rise to the occasion and step up in a spot that they honestly had not been in about 17 years? They stepped up emphatically, particularly that defense. That defense, especially the defensive front, is maybe the best in college football, and their secondary, which was viewed as a question mark, was really good too. There were many times where Bear Bachmeier was looking downfield and all of his receivers were completely covered in that game. There just wasn't many answers for BYU in this contest. And it didn't help matters when you start things off early in the game with a muff punt. That was not great by Parker Kingston. You can't have that. And Kalani Sitake pointed to that often in his post-game press conference. The muff punt put BYU behind a little bit. I also thought the missed interception by Evan Johnson was pretty significant in the game. Evan, if he gets that INT, that's a momentum swinging moment that BYU has feasted on this year. BYU has been the kings of seizing momentum and turning the tide in a game. They never had that moment, whether it was offense, defense, special teams. They never had the momentum-changing play. And they feasted off that the last two seasons. They didn't have that show up at all. And I thought that Evan Johnson play was one that could have created that. And that missed INT opportunity allowed for Texas Tech to score a touchdown. I also thought Texas Tech did a fantastic job at just eliminating Bear Bachmeier, his ability to run the football up the middle of the field. They just took him away completely, and you can see it, the clips here on the KSL Sports YouTube page. There was some creativity from BYU, a little bit. This one-trick play to Carson Ryan was really nice, but there wasn't much to write home about when it came to BYU's offense. You look at the numbers, BYU had 255 total yards of offense, 188 through the air, 67 yards on the ground. That wasn't going to get it done. BYU needed at least 150 on the ground to have a chance to upset Texas Tech. And it didn't happen. Am I naive, too, to think that when BYU got into the second quarter and Raider to Mooney had the pass breakup. Despite being down 13-0, I thought maybe there's a sliver. Maybe there's a sliver of hope that BYU could pull this thing off. It just didn't happen. And Texas Tech star Jacob Rodriguez, he was all over the place. 14 tackles for him. Joey McGuire in the postgame was making the case to the national media for people to start considering him for the Heisman. Why not at this point? The Heisman race this year is so underwhelming and lackluster. Why not let Jacob Rodriguez be in the mix? Why can't he be Manti Te'o? Is it just because the double T doesn't resonate as much as the Gold Dome? That interception he had was pretty athletic. Bear Bachmeier was trying to make a play. He throws the pick to Rodriguez, and away they go. And then he had a fumble recovery as well. It was just a tough day for BYU. Nothing worked. I thought the offensive play calling was too conservative and treating Bear like a freshman, it felt like. I wanted to see more shots, more opportunities. But again, credit to Texas Tech's secondary, which was maybe viewed as a question mark. They were really good. They were on point and locked up BYU's receivers completely. There was no open space down the field. I mean, being in the press box, you could see things develop, and there were times where everything is completely covered, and Bear's just kind of looking and scrambling and wondering, trying to make a play, and then they erased his ability to run up the middle of the field, which he has been excellent at this season. That was a non-starter. And I think it would be interesting to see how BYU would fare in a rematch against Texas Tech, but I'll tell you, there's a big gap between BYU and Texas Tech. There is. A lot would have to change between now and December 6th for BYU to close that gap and feel like they could have a chance to win that game. I think the positives for BYU were the defense, of course. I thought Jack Kelly looked excellent. We'll get to him a little bit later. But one thing that I do come away with from this game and feel that's a big picture positive to this loss, one of the benefits to being in a conference is that if you're not the champion, and look, BYU still has a chance to be that champion, but you have programs that you're chasing. And the Big 12 in the early years since BYU joined, there hasn't been that flag bearer, that program that looks like you're trying to chase them and keep up with them. Everyone's been trying to establish themselves as the front runner. From a resources, from a commitment standpoint, it feels like Texas Tech is emerging as that athletic department and football program. On Saturday, you saw Texas Tech have, Cody Campbell, the prominent booster, board of directors there, Patrick Mahomes, but then you saw them recognize some famous current athletes, Chris Anderson, the guard for Texas Tech, the pitcher from softball. There's so many talented athletes at Texas Tech that they're paying a premium for. And what I'm getting at is that BYU is heavily committed to its athletic department. Look at men's basketball, one of probably the most expensive rosters in college basketball this year. But I think with Texas Tech and their football program, there's been so many different numbers thrown around with them, but it's an expensive roster. You don't get David Bailey for cheap out of the portal. You don't get Lee Hunter. You don't get Romello Height for cheap. You've got to, pay a premium to get those guys. And even Jacob Rodriguez was once a transfer from Virginia, a former quarterback. I think having a program like that is not going to slow down. Whether Texas Tech wins the Big 12 or not, or reaches the playoff or not, whatever happens with them this year, they are continuing to invest at an incredibly high level, even in the revenue sharing era. It's going to be a different climate coming up in 2026 with rev share having a cap and things like that. But still, Tech's got that oil money. They're going to be in the mix for some big-time players. And you see what they're doing in high school recruiting. They are going to be potentially a top 10 recruiter or better in future years, maybe the best classes in the country. So you kind of see what they're doing, and that can be a benchmark for BYU to say, we've got to go replicate that. And what we're doing right now is really good compared to what BYU's been in the past. But if we want to be an annual contender and a program that every year gets the benefit of the doubt in the Big 12, that's what you got to become, because it feels like Texas Tech is becoming that. And that was their, I don't want to say coronation moment, but just a spotlight moment for Tech, that what they're doing is working at an incredibly high level. I don't see them losing the rest of the way. They've got UCF this week and then West Virginia 2 weeks after that on the road. They're going to go 11-1, and they're going to be in Arlington. Will BYU join them? That's a big question. They got to win out their last 3 games to make that happen. Let's take a break. We'll get to more BYU football talk in the stock exchange coming up a little bit later, right here on Cougar Tracks on KSL News Radio, and it's powered by KSL Sports. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube page. Every day, subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating on audio podcast, subscribe to the KSL Sports YouTube channel, wherever and however you watch and listen to the show. Appreciate you for being on board. Wanted to give a quick shout out to BYU women's soccer. They get it done. Win the Big 12 tournament, clinch an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament. Jen Rockwood's squad, in a year where they were the 8th seed. They had to earn their way on the last day of the regular season by beating rival Utah. They get into the field, the last seed in. They knock off number 5 ranked TCU. They take down Baylor, and then they beat Kansas to win the whole thing. They had a backup goalkeeper in that stretch. An incredible run for this BYU women's soccer program that honestly this year looked pretty mediocre. And you're kind of wondering, has the step up to the Big 12 hurt this program? Because still young roster, but they leveled up. There was no question about the talent. And they get an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament. Huge moment for Jen Rockwood. And I would say the biggest, most visible Big 12 championship BYU's earned since joining the league. They've had some cross-country championships, but I think women's soccer is probably the most visible and I think impressive championship that BYU has won in this league since 2023. So congrats to them. They'll have their NCAA selection show coming up on Monday at 2 p.m. We'll have coverage of that on KSLSports.com. So congrats to BYU women's soccer for that impressive showing and getting it done. I was kind of surprised, too, just a quick side note on the women's soccer tournament. The tournament wasn't in Kansas City. It was in Fort Worth and Waco. It was supposed to be in Kansas City at the NWSL Stadium. There was a big announcement on that a couple years ago that the women's soccer tournament was going to go to that NWSL Stadium for 2 seasons. That didn't materialize. I'll have to ask around at the Big 12 to see why that didn't end up happening, because it's kind of underwhelming to see it just at Fort Worth and then Waco for BYU versus Kansas. But nonetheless, the Cougs get it done, and it was an impressive run, and they're going to be going to the NCAA tournament. BYU men's basketball is also off to an incredible start. 2-0 this season. That was expected to take down Villanova, but they're looking great. Take down Holy Cross 98-53, and I think the most noteworthy thing coming out of that game was the fact that Richie Saunders looked like his usual self. Cleared from the illness he was dealing last week going into the Villanova game. 20 points for Richie, 7 of 10 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3. He had 4 rebounds, 2 assists. You look at the stat lines on this BYU team, and when they play completely overmatched squads like Holy Cross, as they did on Saturday night in the home opener, it's just some filthy stat lines that BYU put together on the Crusaders. But that was good to see with Richie Saunders. The 3-point shooting still kind of subpar by what you're used to from BYU, 7 of 25, 28% from 3. But as KY said in the postgame, you're not going to take away the ability to get to the rim. BYU shot 62% from the field. So their ability to attack the rim and get an easy bucket. You're never going to turn down paint attempts and shots right at the rim. This team can get to the rim with ease. It's not a challenging thing for this team to get to the rim. Now, how will that look against UConn this Saturday? We'll find out. In between then, they've got a game against Delaware on Tuesday. But Richie Saunders was brilliant. I think that was just a positive thing to see, because in the exhibitions in the first game against Villanova, Richie just didn't look like Richie from last year. And it kind of looked like a little bit of a filling out process to identify his role with this team, which is still very prominent with this BYU squad, but just a little bit of a filling out. And then it added to the fact that he was dealing with an illness as well. AJ DeBonsa, 17 points, 7 of 10 from the field. This guy is elite in the mid-range and just getting to the hoop, too. The midi game for DeBonsa, you might not have a better mid-range shooter and more efficient shooter in the mid-range game than DeBonsa. He might be the best in the world. I mean, there's an argument to be made that DeBonsa could be the best mid-range guy in the sport. And he was excellent in 24 minutes, 8 boards as well for DeBonsa. Rob Wright, 15 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. I just like the makeup of this team. And you got in the opportunities like this against a team like Holy Cross, you got the chance to get some evaluation on some personnel. You know, Xavier Staten, he gets 12 minutes. Dawson Baker, good night for him off the bench. 12 points in 20 minutes. That guy can still fill it up. And his health is always kind of a question, even though we do forget last year he pretty much played in every game. He played every game. But when he first arrived at BYU, the foot injury and just that's always in the background, in the back of mind when it comes to Dawson. And he was good to go. And 12 points for him in 20 minutes was a excellent performance. Dominique Diomande, the transfer from Washington, 9 points in 13 minutes. I like this team's ability to finish at the paint, cleaning up on the glass. And they also take care of the basketball, too. Through the first 2 games, single digits in turnovers. They're getting possessions up there. The offense is operating at a high level, and you're not turning the ball over. That is a positive sign for this team that's still kind of trying to fill out the spacing, the certain spots of their teammates as they come together against other opponents beyond themselves. And really, this team's been pretty much together since May, but it's still a filling out process. And this week's going to be a lot of fun with Delaware on Tuesday night, 7 p.m. tip on KSL NewsRadio. Pregame begins at 6. And then UConn on Saturday, 5 p.m. tip, pregame at 4. We'll have Cougar Sports Saturday beginning at noon, and then BYU football against TCU at 8:15. I will be in Provo for the football game, but that is going to be a spectacle in the TD Boston Garden on Saturday against UConn, one of the best programs in the sport, and see how BYU stacks up against that will be excellent to see for the Cougars. And that will be a fascinating matchup to watch between BYU and UConn, as it's going to pair BYU at number 7 in the AP poll against number 3 UConn. 3 versus 7. BYU's one of those teams, a top 10 matchup to open the season. Goodness gracious, what world are we living in with BYU basketball? But we're here for it, and we'll be covering it every step of the way, as we'll have post-game reaction, too, from the Marriott Center for BYU in Delaware on Tuesday night. Final break. On the other side, I'll get to the Cougar Stock Exchange, what's trending up and trending down for BYU football next here on Cougar Tracks. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports YouTube page. Mitch Harper with you every day here on Cougar Tracks. And on Mondays on the show, we dive into what's trending up and trending down. It's what we call the Cougar Stock Exchange.
The Cougar Stock Exchange. What's trending up and what's trending down? It's the Cougar Stock Exchange.
It's easy to point to the bad after a 29-7 loss against Texas Tech for BYU football, and that's where we'll start things off with what's trending down. I would say complimentary football, because that got highlighted, I think, in that game. BYU is the ultimate complimentary football team. If one phase of the game is not performing well, maybe the whole ship goes down, especially against a top 10 team. You can get away with it against teams that are outside the top 25, especially when you're at home. But on the road, top 10 team, you got to have all 3 phases dialed in. BYU did it. And so the complimentary piece is trending down, particularly the special teams, which punt return, the punter, Sam Vanderhaar, Will Farron, the kicker, he misses a field goal. The decisions on kick return, it was all kind of disjointed the whole time with special teams. Kelly Papinga, I'm sure, is going to have a mouthful for his group this week as they get ready for TCU. I'd also say what's trending down the BYU offense. I think it highlighted some of their limitations and maybe just the nerves, the trepidation going into the game. Aaron Roderick noted it was the toughest defense they were going to face since Texas 2023, and they played a little bit hesitant and nervous. And you wonder, was there limitations placed on LJ Martin, Bear Bachmeier? Did they unleash everything, or was it just simply Texas Tech blew it all up? But BYU's offense struggled mightily, and they have to take a step back and trend down after this week's performance. Trending up, mostly on the defensive side, Jack Kelly. I think that was huge because he was a question mark going into the game. He was not on the availability report, and even Jay Hill noted that his linebacker unit was probably the healthiest they've been in about 4 weeks, which was promising. And you saw signs of that, particularly in Jack Kelly, who just looked like a man on a mission that, okay, we're down. I'm going to put this team on my back. That was kind of the vibes that Kelly was putting off. I thought he had an excellent performance with 2 sacks in that game. BYU's linebackers in general, Glasker had a sack, Cialia Serra, an early first quarter sack. I thought they showed up and did everything that they could to put this team in a position to try to win this game. Because again, it was 19-0, but it felt like it was at one point in the second half, but it felt like it was 50-0. And so they were doing everything they could possibly, because Texas Tech has 7 appearances in the red zone and they only end up with 29 points. I mean, it could have been much uglier, but BYU's defense was very tough. And one of those guys that was also tough was Raider DeMooney. I thought Raider DeMooney had a strong performance in his return after missing action all the way back since October 11th. Remember in that first quarter against Arizona, he goes out and he missed the second half, the double overtime at Arizona, missed the Utah game, missed the Iowa State game. He storms back. I thought he had a really good game, 6 tackles for DeMooney, and of course that breakup at the end of the first half in the second quarter. I thought that was a great play for DeMooney and just bolsters that safety position that's really good with Volatile, Tanner Wall, and Raider DeMooney and Talon Alfrey and all those guys. So that's in a really good place. And honestly, I look at 2026, Volatile and Raider DeMooney, those are probably your starters next season. So good signs from Raider DeMooney to see him playing so well as he did on Saturday for the Cougars. But it was a tough day for BYU, but they got to pick themselves back up off the mat. And you know what? I think they will. I think BYU will bounce back this year. It helps, too, that unlike last season when they dropped their first game at home, then they had to go on the road. It helps the cause that their one setback was on the road against a really good top 10 team. Now you come back against an opponent that's reeling a bit after losing to Iowa State. BYU could put the hammer down and take care of business against TCU. But long week ahead, we'll see how it all develops. We'll follow BYU TCU week throughout the week here on Cougar Tracks. Full coverage here on the show every single day at noon on the KSL Sports YouTube and 6:30 p.m. on KSL News Radio. And, of course, you can follow me on X and Instagram and TikTok, Mitch_Harper. Follow KSL Sports as well at KSL Sports and download the KSL Sports app today. We'll be back tomorrow with more Cougar Tracks and BYU football and BYU basketball game day right here on the legacy home of the Cougars, KSL News Radio.